Story 1. The Roommate's Watch.
It was my first year of university, and I had just finished unpacking all my things into my tiny dorm room. My family was about to leave, so I quickly said goodbye, watched them go, and closed the door behind me. It felt strange, like the first chapter of my life was finally opening, and I was stepping into it all alone. Later that same day, my roommate finally arrived. Her name was Delia. The moment I met her, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was off. She had this strange air about her, like she didn't quite understand how to interact with people. When I introduced myself, I smiled and stretched out my hand for a handshake, but she hesitated. After what felt like an awkward pause, she awkwardly laughed, looked down at my outstretched hand as if she were confused, then finally gave me a limp, awkward shake. "Hi," I said, trying not to show my discomfort.
Hi.
She replied. Her voice was soft and uncertain. I felt an uncomfortable silence hanging in the air. I tried to make small talk, asking where she was from, what her major was. But every time I spoke, she answered with short, clipped responses, her eyes darting away as if she didn't want to be seen. She didn't seem rude, just not there. By the time the evening came around, I was already regretting the situation. It was supposed to be an exciting time, fresh start, new friends, but Delia seemed like a different kind of person, a lonely one. That night, I decided to leave the room to explore campus and meet some of the other students. When I came back, Delia was sitting at her desk, typing furiously at her laptop. I noticed she hadn't moved from that spot for hours. At first, I figured she was just busy, but then I realized it was past 11 p.m., and she hadn't moved at all. "Hey, Delia," I said cautiously. She didn't respond. I stood there, watching her for a moment. "Delia," I asked again, my voice a little louder. She looked up then, blinking slowly, almost as if waking up from a trance.
Sorry.
She muttered, turning back to her screen without another word. I shrugged it off as nothing. Maybe she was just tired. It didn't seem like something worth confronting her over, but I couldn't shake the odd sensation that something wasn't quite right. That night, I went to bed earlier than usual, hoping to start fresh the next day. But just as I was starting to drift off to sleep, I woke with a jolt. I opened my eyes, and there was Delia sitting up on the side of her bed, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. Her face was pale in the moonlight streaming through the window, her dark hair tangled around her face. "Delia," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She didn't respond. She just continued staring at me. I sat up quickly, my body tense with unease. "What are you doing?" I asked, but my voice cracked slightly, betraying my fear. She blinked slowly, like she was processing my words for the first time.
Sorry.
She mumbled and laid back down without another word. I lay there, staring at the ceiling for what felt like hours, my heart racing. Eventually, I fell back to sleep, but I couldn't shake the image of her sitting there in the dark, watching me. The next morning, when I woke up, Delia was gone. It was 10 a.m., and I had already started getting ready for a campus tour. I figured maybe she was at some orientation event or hanging out with other students. But when I passed by the school gardens later in the day, I saw her again. She was sitting on the ground behind a patch of bushes, staring intently at the bark of a nearby tree, running her fingers over it in slow, deliberate movements. I watched her for a moment, unsure of what to do. A couple of students passed by me and giggled.
Is she okay?
One of them whispered, "I don't know." I muttered, "She's my roommate." The students looked at me with a mixture of confusion and pity. They didn't know what to say, so they just kept walking. But I couldn't stop staring at Delia. She didn't even seem to notice me, lost in whatever strange trance she was in. The day passed without much else happening, and I started to feel like I was overreacting. Delia was just different. People are different, right? But that night, things took another turn. When I came back to the dorm, Delia was sitting at her desk again, her laptop open in front of her. I thought nothing of it at first, but then I saw it in my bag, open on the floor, the zipper halfway undone. I walked over to it, suddenly cold. My heart skipped a beat when I realized some of my things were out of place. My journals had been moved, my pens scattered around the bag. It didn't make sense. How had she gotten into my things? "Delia, did you go through my bag?" I asked, my voice sharp. She turned to me slowly, her face pale, her eyes wide with panic.
No.
She blurted out, her voice shaky.
I didn't touch your stuff.
But her reaction only made it worse. I stared at her for a long moment, unsure of what to do. Something in her eyes told me she was lying, but I didn't know how to prove it. So, I let it go, telling myself it was just a mistake. But when I went to bed that night, I woke up again. This time, there was a soft clicking noise, something rhythmic, like the sound of a lock turning. My blood ran cold. I crept out of bed and walked quietly to the door. Through the peephole, I saw her, Delia, standing on the other side. She was crouched low, her hands at the door handle, trying to unlock it. I froze, panic surging through my veins. She was trying to get into my room. I didn't know what to do. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest, I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed my phone and called campus security, my hands shaking as I explained what was happening. Within minutes, the door was knocked open, and two officers rushed in. They found Delia standing just outside, her face unreadable. They arrested her quietly, and I didn't say a word. As they took her away, I felt a strange mix of relief and horror. She had been stalking me. She had been watching me. And now, she was gone. I never saw Delia again after that night. They didn't tell me what happened to her, but I imagined she was expelled. I didn't care to ask. The rest of my university years were normal, but every now and then, I'll hear a clicking sound in the middle of the night, and for a split second, I'll wonder if Delia is standing on the other side of the door, waiting.
Story 2: The Shadow by the Lake. I went to Eastwood University for 2 years. I quickly became part of a tight group of friends, and we'd hang out almost every weekend. One Friday night in October, when we didn't have any big plans, my close friends Jack and Kyle and I decided to head out to the campus's secluded nature preserve by the lake. There was a small clearing on the far side of the lake, the perfect spot for a fire. It was hidden enough that we didn't have to worry about being caught by campus security or other students. Sometimes people came out here to drink or smoke, but it was an area most people never bothered with. We liked that it was so isolated. That night, we brought beers, lit a fire, and sat around, having what we called a guy talk. As the night went on, the drinks started to hit, and time seemed to slip by unnoticed. We were laughing so much that at one point, Kyle tripped over a log and tumbled into the leaves. That's when Jack suddenly went quiet and whispered, "Shh." We all froze, straining our ears. From the darkness, we heard the unmistakable sound of crunching leaves and snapping branches. Without saying a word, we all tossed our beer bottles into the lake. We were underage, and we didn't want to risk getting caught by campus police. We quickly stuffed the rest of the beers into a backpack, but the alcohol had us on edge, and our nerves only heightened. The fire was bright, but this place was so remote that it felt almost impossible anyone would find us. The sound got closer. It definitely sounded like one person, but we couldn't be sure. Then, a branch snapped loudly right next to us, sending all of us jumping to our feet. We weren't the type to confront anyone, so we stayed silent, occasionally shushing each other. It felt as if whoever or whatever was out there was circling us, making its way around the clearing in wide arcs. The noise of breaking twigs and rustling leaves filled the air. What started as nervous giggles soon turned into genuine terror. Out of nowhere, a loud thud shook the ground, and a large branch landed right next to the fire. Jack bolted without a word, running into the woods. Kyle and I stood there, staring at each other in shock, half laughing and half fearing for our lives. Before we could even react, another branch came flying at us, striking Kyle in the shoulder. He screamed, clutching his arm. I grabbed the backpack, helped Kyle to his feet, and we ran toward the road leading back to the dorms. When we reached the road, we paused, gasping for breath. But then we heard it again, footsteps following us. The figure had tracked us all the way to the edge of the preserve. Without looking back, we sprinted the rest of the way to the dorms, not stopping until we were safely inside Jack's room. He was already there, pacing and wide-eyed. We glanced out the window toward the woods. There, standing at the edge of the tree line, was a shadowy figure. It seemed to pace back and forth, lingering between the trees. Every time a car passed, it would slip back into the shadows, only to reappear when the road was clear. After what felt like an eternity, the figure finally vanished into the forest. We tried to brush it off that night, convincing ourselves it was nothing. But when morning came, we all realized just how terrifying it had been. From that night onward, we made a silent vow. We never went back to the lake after dark. Story 3: The Knock on the Door. During my sophomore year, I had a secluded dorm room tucked away in a corner of the building. It was private and quiet, which I loved. One evening, while studying for a bio exam, I heard a faint tapping on my door. At first, I ignored it, figuring it was nothing. But when I checked, no one was there. The following night, the knocking returned, louder this time. I called out, "Who is it?" but got no response. I opened the door, but once again, no one was in the hallway. I thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it. The next night, it happened again, this time even louder than before. I was starting to get creeped out, but I decided to confront whoever it was. I opened my door, expecting to find someone, but no one was around. My heart raced as I sprinted down the hallway, convinced that I had seen someone just moments before. I turned the corner and saw a bathroom door slowly shutting. I approached it cautiously and pushed it open. The light was off, and the room was empty, except for a pair of heavy boots visible underneath one of the stall doors. I hesitated, my mind racing, then slowly opened the stall door, only to find no one inside. Just then, a creepy giggle echoed through the bathroom. It wasn't childlike or playful, but something far more sinister. It sent chills down my spine. Terrified, I ran back to my room, slamming the door behind me. I tried to ignore the unsettling feeling and hoped it would stop, but the knocking continued for another half-minute before it finally ceased. The next morning, I asked everyone on my floor if they had heard the knocking or were playing a prank on me. They all swore they hadn't. After that night, the giggling and the knocking stopped completely, and they never returned. For the rest of the semester, I didn't hear so much as a tap on my door. But the strange giggling and the mysterious knocking still haunt me to this day, and I can never shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me.